It appears Bob Iger is fighting not only for his Disney life, but his legacy as this proxy war takes it up to the next level, Aaron, as Bob Iger is trying to hold off all these people that are pointing out that he's done a terrible job and lost everybody billions of dollars in the process.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I'm loving it. I'm loving Bob in the hot seat.
As promised, Trian Partners, the hedge fund led by activist investor Nelson Peltz, officially submitted its preliminary proxy statements for the election of Peltz and former Disney CFO Jay Rusullo to Disney board at the Mouse House's 2024 annual shareholder meeting. Trian, in waging its proxy fight, argues that Disney has underperformed the larger market and its media and tech industry peers as a result of a board that has failed to adequately perform its primary responsibilities as stewards of shareholder capital.
Yeah, it's been absolutely ridiculous. The decisions that they've made, the things that they've doubled down on, the direction that they're going, they just keep losing money and losing money and losing money. Every single aspect of their business is bleeding right now. Park attendance is reportedly down. They, had basically, with the exception of, I think, Guardians of the Galaxy, which eked out a small profit, not worth the investment, but eked out a small profit. But it didn't make up for the 9-10 bombs that they had that lost them hundreds of millions of dollars on pretty much each film, from The Marvels to Haunted Mansion to Indiana Jones and The Dial of Destiny. All of these movies have lost money. Star Wars is in terrible shape. The MCU is in terrible shape. Everything that Bob purchased, he's never innovated. He's never been good at creating things. He's just been good at acquiring things. But everything that he's acquired, he has run into the ground. Even Pixar has been run into the ground because he saw John Lasseter as a threat. Credit to the Disney Files over on our friend Chris Gore's channel, Film Threat. They've been reporting on that Lasseter was not removed for giving too many hugs. Lasseter was removed because that became a convenient way to get him out of the company, because Bob Iger saw him as a threat to his position, someone who might eventually replace him as CEO. Because not only can John Lasseter run a business, but he can also run creative. So he had more skills than Bob. So you had to get him out the door. And they put Pixar in the hands of incompetents who, Jennifer Lee came in, and her mandate was, we're going to have equity within within Pixar. We're going to bring in all of these people. We're going to make sure we have a certain number of this group and a certain number of this group and a certain number of this group. But the one thing that they didn't account for was, well, they all need to be talented. And so you filled Disney and you filled Pixar and you filled the company with activists who do not have any creative talent. They're just activists. And that's all they can do is fill Disney's product with their activism. And that's not something that anybody's willing to pay for. And we've seen it at the box office.
Yeah, and it's crazy. It's not just like entertainment. You obviously think about Star Wars and Marvel, which he did bring to new heights, but has obviously fallen down quite substantially. Even you have like ESPN, which I used to consume at a minimum of 2 hours every single day. I would watch Sports Center. Like in the morning, I would watch Sports Center. In the afternoon, if they had sports programming, I would watch that. It's been years since I could even stomach what ESPN has come at this point. I remember the last presidential election, you had people from ESPN getting suspended left and right because they couldn't shut up about the presidential election and they wouldn't talk about sports.
Yeah, it's like nobody's coming to ESPN to hear political commentary. You may go to CNN for that. And, certainly David Zaslav and Warner Brothers have had to, try to rein in CNN and try to make that profitable. But it's the same thing. It's the same infection, whether it's, CNN and, over at Warner Brothers or it's ESPN over at Disney. It's this idea that you have a platform and therefore you need to talk about your politics. And that didn't used to be the case. It's ridiculous that we're here now. These things are sports, entertainment. These are meant to be escapes from your day-to-day life, from the day-to-day grind, from the politics that you have to deal with and you have to listen to on the news. That's where you go for that. You don't want it in your entertainment. And, by trying to force it in, by trying to make everything political, they've cut their own throats. People have walked away and they've found alternative forms of entertainment. You can go read a book. You can go listen to a podcast. You can watch YouTube. You can do all kinds of things now. You have all kinds of options. And people have told them, we don't need you anymore. And they have been so slow on the uptake. As far as Bob Iger is concerned, we know he had presidential ambitions. So he was thinking he was going to be able to fill Disney with activists that would support the sort of policies that he would push as president. So it's a concerted effort to kind of like take over entertainment because it's a critical node in infrastructure to the culture. Unfortunately, his ego got in the way. He had to come back and push Chapek out. He did it just in time for the weight of all of his terrible, terrible decision making to come crashing down on top of him. And it's kind of beautiful. He's ruined any legacy that he had. And we know that's very important to him. And I am delighted and I'm here for it.
Trian outlined 5 areas of concern at Disney and its proposals to address them. Number 1, corporate governance, adopt best-in-class governance, finally complete a successful CEO succession, and align management pay with performance, streaming profitability, target and achieve Netflix-like EBITDA margins of 15 to 20% by fiscal year 2027. The future of ESPN, commit to a reasonable defined payback period and return profile on ESPN flagship direct-to-consumer and communicate it in detail prior to launch. Studio creativity, board-led review of creative processes and structure to restore leadership, accountability, and reclaim number 1 box office position with leading economics, parks and experience growth. Execute on a clear vision for parks targeting at least high single-digit operating income growth to ensure adequate returns on $60 billion of CAPEX. And that first one I think is really interesting, the idea that we want to align the pay and compensation of the executives themselves to actually being successful. And I wonder why Bob Iger is not on board with this plan.
You see it in Japanese companies when the executives make decisions that end in the company losing money. They forego their bonuses. Sometimes they even forego their salaries because it's on their honor. American business doesn't have that. American business is, the executives made a bunch of stupid decisions that lost the company money. Well, let's cut the lower end of our workforce. Let's cut the people that need the jobs most and make sure our executives still get their bonuses. It's a very backwards kind of system that we have in the United States. And the idea that Disney is going to go in and if Nelson Peltz gets his way, which I'm not convinced that he will, but I desperately hope he does, that they're going to be able to tie the salaries and the bonuses to success, I think is fantastic. And I think that's a great opportunity for people that are hungry who might actually want to push the company forward, which is what someone needs to do.
He also leveraged the hell out of Star Wars, especially over movie theaters. Like I believe once The Force Awakens came out, I think theaters got 0% cut of the revenue in the first week. And then once they committed to showing The Force Awakens, they weren't allowed to remove it from the screen for 4 weeks. And they continue to try to do that. We know that they leveraged them over like Toys R Us and stuff like that. And it really ended up blowing up in their faces. And they almost have no leverage left whatsoever because people don't trust them anymore.
No, and these licenses aren't worth anything anymore. Star Wars is basically a worthless license at this point. It used to be a license to print money. You could put Star Wars on anything. If you had a company that sold soap, you'd be like, let's get the Star Wars license and sell some Star Wars soap. It'll bump our numbers because, you would have people just go out and buy it. Yeah, I want to smell like a Wookiee. Let me grab that bar of soap, and that's not the case anymore. Now you put Star Wars on something and it's like, ugh. Like I was a big fan of Dr. Squatch's soaps when they started out, and then they got the Star Wars license and put Star Wars soaps out. And I was like, well, I'm done with this company.
But it is not just Trian that's coming after him. Blackwells Capital, a Disney shareholder with plenty of opinions about who should sit on the company's board of directors, blasted rival Trian Group for its own board maneuvering. Blackwell's chief investment officer said Trian co-founder Nelson Peltz has come up short in terms of suggesting ways for the media giant to right its ship. Blackwell's press release also criticized Disney for entering into an agreement this month with Value Act Capital Management, in essence trading confidential information for the investment firm's support of the company's slate of board nominees. And you can see the water is just getting hotter and hotter around Bob Iger because it's not just one company, it's 2 or 3 that are kind of seeing blood in the water. One of them is siding with him, taking advantage and getting some special favors, while the other 2 are seeing him as like a dead duck just waiting to be taken over because he's messed up so much that they know now is the time to pounce on these fools.
You know what is interesting to me is who owns a lot of Disney stock and who has every reason to not like Bob Iger is George Lucas. In the sale of Star Wars, he got a ton of Disney stock, and I don't know why Nelson Peltz, maybe he has, but I feel like Nelson Peltz should go to George and say like, hey, do you want to add your stock to our proxy fight? Because I feel like it might be something George was interested in doing. I think it's great. Like they keep saying Peltz has put forth no strategic initiatives on how to improve the company. He has. Getting Bob Iger out of complete power is the first step in fixing that company. The board is a bunch of Iger yes men. It's a bunch of acolytes. So you get people in there who will actually challenge him, will actually hold his feet to the fire. And, and then eventually you get somebody who will replace him. And I think that's why he fears this so much, is because Jay Rasulo is a guy who was in line for the CEO position, who very well could have stepped into that. and another guy that Bob Iger got rid of, because any threat to his power he had to kick out. So they could come in and theoretically replace him, and I think that's already a strategic advantage. You've got to get rid of the source of the rot.
Absolutely. You actually have to understand and identify what does Disney look like if they're successful. And that's certainly what Nelson, Peltz, and Trian are doing, and saying, these are the things that we need to go after. These are the measurements of success. Now, how we get there, we'll get to afterwards. But obviously, you've got to unseat Bob Iger and his total control before you're able to do that. But there's really doesn't feel like there's a standard of success at Disney right now, other than, if it's Bob Iger approved, it's successful. It doesn't matter if it makes money or not. Obviously, you can't run a company like that. And just having someone in there and say, hey, no, we need to define what are the goals and objectives and actually be able to meet them in a calendar year, which would be very different for Disney over the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, and I feel like, this all comes down to probably, I think that Bob Iger is probably compromised in some way, because the fact that Kathleen Kennedy still has a job after ruining the most successful money printing brand on the planet, this huge entertainment juggernaut that was always successful, even when it would come out, and even the prequels where people were kind of like, I don't know if I like these. They were still wildly successful financially. They still moved a lot of product. People were into the Clone Wars. People were still reading all the novels. I used to read every Star Wars novel that came out. I was on board for all of it. Give me as much Star Wars as possible. Now I can't even go back and watch the original trilogy. They've made me dislike Star Wars so much. And all of that falls under Kathleen Kennedy. She's had nothing but colossal failures. She's the worst studio head probably in history. And you can say she was executive producer on all these successful films. She's great. It's no, she was involved with people that were successful. She was involved with Frank Marshall, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and her name got on those things. And I'm sure, in whatever secretarial position they had her in to be executive producer, you count these beans and you go get us coffee. I'm sure that, she was effective in that role, but people get promoted beyond their level of competence. And she has proven incompetent as a studio head, incompetent as a creative. And yet she maintains her job after losing billions of dollars for the company. So what does she have on Bob Iger? I mean, I'm sure there's a reason that her little acolyte, Leslie Headland, came from Harvey Weinstein's office. What does Kathleen know? What does she have over everybody's head in Hollywood that allows her to continue to fail and not suffer any repercussions for it whatsoever?
Disney, in its own proxy filing January 16th, formally rejected Trian's nomination of Peltz and Russullo. In addition, the board recommended that shareholders not vote for 3 candidates floated by Blackwells Capital. Instead, Disney urged shareholders to vote for its own 12-member slate of board candidates. Earlier this month, Disney announced it had lined up the backing of activist investor Blackwells Capital, which has a significant ownership position in the media conglomerate. Bloomberg has reported, but the actual size is not known. Trian controls about $3 billion worth of Disney shares, 78% of which are owned by former Marvel Entertainment chairman Ike Perlmutter. And there certainly are a lot of people that do not hold Bob Iger in high esteem and appear to be ganging up and going on one side to oust this guy because they know that he's completely incompetent.
Well, when you're a paranoid king and you start eliminating your rivals, but you don't put them down permanently, this is what happens, especially when they own a bunch of stock in your company. It's kind of great to see. It's, we've gotten these reports of Bob Iger's personality and what a paranoid, petty tyrant he is, and how he never even left Disney. Bob Chapek never got the big suite with the good bathroom because Bob Iger needed to hold on to that because of his ego. And he had to come back for his ego. And it's just great to see when someone has an undeserved ego and then they extend themselves too far and they suffer the ramifications of their actions. It's a delight to watch. I'm really loving the fact that this guy could have gone out when he did, and he would have been hailed as having this great legacy of leading Disney to all of these tremendous successes. But his ego wouldn't let him let it go. And so he forced out Chapek, and he came back just as everything that he had built up was falling apart because it was never on stable ground to begin with. And his legacy will be ruined forever because of it. Same thing with Kathleen Kennedy. They will send her off with all the kudos and flowers that they can and talk about how great she is. But the fact of the matter is her legacy will always be one of failure. Her legacy will always be one of destroying Star Wars, destroying Indiana Jones. And you know what? I think that that's great. I think that we need more cautionary tales like that. Don't extend yourself beyond your reach.
And I think her legacy is her standing up, on the stage where George Lucas, says, without these three people, there is no Star Wars.
Oh,
and
no,
he
Indiana
never
Jones.
mentions
Yeah, no,
her
Indiana
name.
Jones. Yeah, never mentions her at all. And
Yeah,
she expected it. That was the beautiful part, is we'll always be able to watch that. She's expecting to be praised. And he goes through just like everybody except her. It's fantastic.
Because even George knows that, even though I believe that she was his handpicked successor, that she's failed and she wasn't the reason that Indiana Jones became a household name. She wasn't the reason that Star Wars and Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic and all that stuff became the enormous powers that they were. She was a part of it, but she wasn't the reason that it happened.
No, it's just, she was along for the ride. And, maybe she was effective in the position, whatever tasks George had for her, maybe she was effective at that, but that doesn't mean that she should take over creative. And this is much, George, I think, viewed her much the same way that Iger viewed Chapek, is that she's going to take over the day-to-day running of things. But, you even see that interview where she's like, oh, George is really the keeper of the flame. And he's going to be there telling us, what works and what doesn't, and being a part of this. And then as soon as she got power, she pushed George out the door. They threw out George's treatments for the next 3 movies and decided to do something else. And, he was like, fine. And he went away. Same thing with Chapek. Iger thought that Chapek was going to be this little puppet that he could control. So even though he wasn't in the CEO position anymore, he could still, manipulate Chapek and have Chapek do what he wanted. And it turned out Chapek had ideas of his own. And so Iger had to, cut his throat and come back in. And now it's all failing spectacularly.
Yep, and it's all coming to a head over the next few months or whatever. We do have this proxy battle, and everyone is coming for Bob Iger at his position, and it definitely feels like he's already lost his legacy in the process, because certainly he made some great acquisitions that worked out very fine until he put his stamp on it, and then they all went to shit.
Yeah, his stamp turned out to be a starfish kiss on all of these properties. And, they've all gone directly into the toilet.
Now, I do want to say Aaron Sparrow and I are not done. We're done with this portion and what's going to go up on YouTube, but there is another hour and 40 minutes this week on the Geek Fix that you have not checked out. The Patreon, I have that, and plus another 6 hours of brand new content every single week on the Patreon, including podcasts with Jim, Doc, and all that kind of fun stuff. And Aaron, we got lots of stuff to get into, including Arrested Development and more fun stuff like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be a blast. You guys should come over to the Patreon. You get to hear us talk about whatever the hell we want, which is kind of fun. And you get unfiltered Doc, you get Jim, all kinds of good stuff on the Patreon.